My brothers and sisters, what I am about to reveal will shake you, because it is not just a story of a deal. It is the story of a continent that has been robbed for decades. It is the story of Europe's desperation and Africa's awakening, and it begins in the dry soil of Burkina Faso, where uranium lies hidden beneath the ground, a resource so valuable that one single deal was worth $12 billion, yet the people who live above that soil were never meant to see a single coin of it. This deal was not public, it was not debated. It was signed in the shadows, between French corporations and local elites. It was written in foreign languages and calculated in European banks. The plan was simple. Uranium would be extracted, pennies on the dollar shipped quietly to Europe, where it would power reactors and secure energy independence for Paris. While Burkina Faso remained in darkness, then something happened that Europe never expected. A young soldier, a leader who does not bow, a man named Ibrahim Traoré, stood up and said, "No, the contract was exposed, the back door. Meetings were interrupted, and what was supposed to be Europe's guaranteed $12 billion jackpot turned into Europe's $12 billion nightmare." Imagine the panic in Brussels. Imagine the meetings in Paris as diplomats whispered that the deal had collapsed because for the first time Burkina Faso was no longer willing to play the role of silent colony. The decision was not only economic, it was symbolic. It said to Europe, "We will not sell our future for fake agreements. We will not trade our uranium for promises that never reach our people." This rejection shook investors because it meant that the old model of control was breaking down. The model where billions of dollars flow out of Africa, while only millions trickle back. The model where contracts are signed under pressure with conditions that trap nations in debt. The rejection of this $12 billion contract was like a torch in the night, signaling to other African nations that sovereignty is possible. Would collapse. But the truth was the opposite. The collapse was Europe's $12 billion figure was not only about uranium. It represented the fragile structure of European energy security without cheap African uranium. Cost of nuclear power in France skyrockets without cheap African uranium. The balance sheets of European energy companies collapse without cheap African uranium. The illusion that Europe can dictate Africa's destiny crumbles. And Traoré knew it. He used his speeches to make it clear that Africa's resources must serve Africans. He reminded the youth that gold, uranium, lithium, cotton, these are not cursed gifts. These are blessings that must not be sold for 50 or 60 fake dollar per ton while billions are made abroad. He reminded the people that aid money is just a chain painted in gold, that every time Europe offers 10 million in aid, they take away 10 billion in resources. He reminded the world that sovereignty is not a slogan, it is a practice, and rejecting the $12 billion uranium contract was proof of that practice. Now think about the ripple effect across the Sahel. When Mali heard this story, when Niger heard this story, when Guinea heard this story, leaders and citizens alike began asking, why should we sell our resources at colonial prices? Why should we sign contracts where 90% of profit leaves our soil? Why should we believe the promises of aid while our people remain poor? The rejection became contagious. It became a political virus, spreading from one capital to another. Europe's diplomats ran to stop it. They offered new deals, softer words, bigger promises, but the momentum was against them. The rejection was too powerful, too symbolic. At the heart of this controversy is uranium, the invisible power that fuels nuclear plants across Europe. Asia, the mineral that can decide the destiny of nations for decades. France had relied on Niger for cheap uranium. Decades West Africa was the invisible battery of European energy, but when Niger turned towards sovereignty, when Burkina Faso refused to sign the $12 billion deal, Europe began to realize that its energy empire was built on sand. The desperation is not only about money, it is about survival, because if Europe cannot secure cheap uranium, its energy bills rise, its industries weaken, its political power diminishes, its citizens begin to question their leaders. So Europe began to frame Traoré as a threat. They launched headlines calling him anti-democratic. They whispered about coups and instability. They tried to divide his alliances. They spoke of sanctions. On the ground in Burkina Faso, something different was happening. Roads were being built, schools were being discussed, alliance with Asia were being strengthened, partnerships with Russia were being expanded, and most importantly, the people were feeling pride. Pride that their nation had not been sold. Pride that for once their resources had been defended. Pride that our leader placed sovereignty above secret contracts. Now think about the numbers. $12 billion sounds enormous. But in truth, the uranium beneath Burkina Faso's soil is worth many times more. If fully developed, if invested properly, it could power Africa itself. It could fund infrastructure across the Sahel. It could raise millions out of poverty. But under the European contract, it was to be sold for pennies. The profit sent abroad, the people left behind. This is why the rejection was controversial, not because it was irrational, but because it was irrational too rational, it was logical, it was bold, and that made Europe desperate. The desperation is visible in the sudden visits from European envoys, in the sudden promises of aid and the sudden calls for dialogue, but the truth is the clock is ticking. Europe no longer holds all the cards. Asia is in the room. China offers infrastructure deals, India offers agricultural cooperation, Russia offers military security, Turkey offers trade corridors. Africa suddenly has choices, and Europe hates that because choice means bargaining power, and bargaining power means sovereignty. And Traoré speaks with words that burn through colonial illusions. He tells the youth that Africa is not poor. Africa is rich beyond imagination. It is only managed by poor leaders who signed away wealth for personal gain. He tells the people that if Europe offers billions to exploit uranium, then uranium must be worth trillions. Europe fights to keep Africa divided. Then unity must be the greatest weapon. He tells the continent that sovereignty is not free. It is earned with courage, with sacrifice, with refusal to bow. The story of the $12 billion uranium contract is therefore more than a story of Burkina Faso. It is the story of Africa's awakening. It is the story of Europe's decline. It is the story of global power shifting before our eyes, and the reactions are not small. Because when leaders gather behind closed doors, they speak not only of Burkina Faso, they speak of dominoes, they speak of Mali, they speak of Niger, they speak of Congo, they speak of the fear that an entire continent may reject their contracts, their influence, their aid, and when that happens, Europe's desperate grip is gone. So my brothers and sisters, this is the reality. Europe is desperate because the rejection of one deal worth $12 billion has exposed the fragility of an entire system, a system that for 70 years kept Africa bound to Europe, a system that is now collapsing under the weight of sovereignty, courage, and as Burkina Faso continues to stand firm, as Traoré continues to reject fake aid, as the people continue to demand dignity. The message grows louder. Africa will not sell its uranium for cheap. Africa will not sign contracts in the shadows. Africa will not remain silent while billions are stolen. This is the beginning of a new chapter, and Europe cannot stop it.